She sold the cottage. She smiled through the whole wedding. She sat in the front row and watched her daughter walk toward a man she knew was dangerous. And she said nothing. Not yet. Because Dorothy Hawkins had spent 40 years learning that the most powerful moves are the quiet ones. My name is Dorothy Hawkins, 63 years old, retired school principal from Oakville, Ontario, single mother. And 3 weeks before my daughter's wedding, the man she was about to marry sat across from me at a white tablecloth restaurant and told me to disappear from her life. He smiled when he said it, that smooth, practiced smile of a man who has never once been told no by someone who actually meant it. He had no idea who he was talking to. Claire was everything I had poured my life into. After my husband Raymond passed when she was only 11, I worked every hour I had to build her a future. Weekend tutoring sessions, double shifts during the school year, every spare dollar saved and redirected toward her education, her stability, her dreams. She grew up brilliant and warm and achingly kind. And when she called me, trembling with happiness, to say she was engaged, I pushed every quiet reservation I had down deep and told her I was so happy for her because I wanted to be. I needed to be. But I had been watching Gregory Malone for 14 months, and what I saw made the back of my neck tighten every single time. It was never anything dramatic at first. It never is with men like him. It was the way he changed the subject whenever money came up, the way his charm seemed to arrive slightly ahead of him, like something he rehearsed before leaving the house. The way he asked about my cottage on Georgian Bay, not once, but twice in a single year, both times framed as casual curiosity, both times with his eyes just a little too steady for casual. I had watched my late husband sink slowly into debt he was too proud to name. I had learned the hard way what evasion looks like from the inside. I recognized every single one of those patterns in the man my daughter was about to marry. 3 weeks before the wedding, Gregory asked to meet me for lunch, just the two of us. He chose a restaurant near his office in downtown Toronto, the kind of place with white tablecloths and portions too small for the price. I arrived first, which I always do, old habit from 40 years of teaching. He came in 4 minutes late, sat down without apologizing, and ordered a sparkling water before he even looked at me. "Dorothy," he said, folding his hands on the table, "I want to have an honest conversation." Something tightened in my chest. "All right," I said. "Claire and I have been talking," he said smoothly, "about boundaries, about our future together, about the kind of marriage we want to build." He paused long enough to make it theatrical. "And we have agreed that there needs to be some distance between her and you, the kind that lets us breathe. You call her every day, Dorothy. You drop by unannounced. You have opinions about her work, her diet, her schedule. Claire is too kind to say it herself, but it is suffocating." He took a sip of water. "We are starting a new chapter, and frankly, the best gift you could give us, the most loving thing you could do, is to step back significantly." I looked at him across that white tablecloth. "Did Claire ask you to say this?" I said, keeping my voice even. "Claire and I are a team," he said smoothly. "We make decisions together." That was not an answer. "And if I do not step back?" I asked. He smiled again, that same practiced, pleasant smile. "Then things will get uncomfortable. Claire will have to make choices, and I think you know which way that will go. She loves you, Dorothy, but she loves her marriage more. That is how it should be." Then he picked up the menu as casually as if he had just commented on the weather and asked if I had tried the salmon. I drove home in silence. I did not cry. I felt something colder than sadness. I felt clarity. Because here's what Gregory Malone did not know about me. 6 months before that lunch, I had hired a private investigator named Sandra. Meticulous, discreet, extraordinarily good at her job. I told myself I was probably wrong, that I was a worried mother turning shadows into monsters, but I hired her anyway, and I told her to follow the money. What she found took weeks to piece together. When she laid the full report on my kitchen table, I sat with it for a long time before I could read it all the way through. Gregory had a business partner. Together, they had spent 5 years moving through the same pattern in city after city. They would identify women in their 30s, successful and trusting, then build romantic relationships with them. Once the relationship was serious, they would begin working their way toward the family finances, sometimes through investment opportunities that quietly drained retirement accounts, sometimes through real estate arrangements that benefited their firm and nobody else, sometimes through loans that were never meant to be repaid. 3 families in the Greater Toronto area, 2 in Ottawa, 1 in Vancouver. None of them had gone to the police, because embarrassment is a powerful silencer. Sandra had also found something else. Gregory had a storage unit rented under a numbered company. Inside, based on documents legally obtained, were records of 3 shell corporations, none of which had ever filed proper tax returns. The kind of paperwork that's shown to the right people becomes very interesting very quickly. After that restaurant lunch, I went home and reread Sandra's report from the beginning, and I made a decision. He wanted me to step back. I would give him exactly that. But first, I needed to make a few arrangements. The cottage on Georgian Bay had been in my family for 40 years. Claire had spent every summer of her childhood there. She had learned to canoe on that bay, caught her first fish off that dock, brought her university friends for long weekends. She had told Gregory early in their relationship that she expected it would become theirs eventually, a family retreat. Gregory had asked about the property value twice in the past year, casually, almost as an afterthought. The cottage was in my name, solely mine. I called my real estate lawyer the following morning, and within 2 weeks, we had a private sale agreement with a retired couple from Barrie who had been looking in that area for 3 seasons. The sale was set to close the week after the wedding. I also called my accountant and began moving certain assets into a family trust, the kind of restructuring that takes time to understand if you're not expecting it, and that would make several things Gregory might have been counting on considerably more complicated than he planned. And then I called Sandra back. I need copies of everything, I told her, organized clearly, formatted so that someone who is not a lawyer can read it and understand it in 5 minutes. How many copies? She asked. I thought about Claire's guest list. 62, I said. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Dorothy, she said carefully, what are you planning? I'm stepping back, I said, exactly like he asked. The week before the wedding, I helped Claire address invitations, steam her dress, and taste test the cake. I sat beside her at the rehearsal dinner and watched Gregory work the room, that easy smile moving from table to table like something professionally applied. He caught me watching him once and gave me a small nod of satisfaction, as though he believed I had accepted the terms he had laid out. I smiled back warmly. The wedding ceremony was held in the inn's garden beneath an arch of white roses and late September Ontario sky. Claire walked down the aisle, and her face was open and radiant in the way a face only is when it believes it is stepping toward something true. I sat in the front row and watched her. There was a moment when she reached the altar and turned to look at Gregory, and he smiled at her. And she smiled back, that smile full and unguarded and trusting, and I felt the full weight of what I was doing settle across my shoulders. I breathed through it. I thought of Sandra's report. I thought of the 3 women in Toronto and Ottawa and Vancouver who never got a warning. I thought of what Claire's life would look like in 5 years, 10 years, once Gregory had done what men like Gregory do. I stayed quiet through the ceremony. When the officiant asked if anyone had cause to object, I looked straight ahead at the roses on the arch. The truth did not need my voice in that moment. It was already sitting in a cream-colored envelope at 62 place settings in the dining room. The reception began at 5. The evening light came gold and long through the inn's tall windows, and the band played something soft and easy, and the champagne was very good. I sat at the family table and watched people find their seats, watched the small moment of curiosity as each guest picked up the envelope beside their plate. Gregory was at the head table, talking to his best man. He had not looked at his place setting yet. At 6, the event coordinator tapped the microphone gently and said that the bride's mother had prepared a personal note for each guest, and that everyone was welcome to open their envelopes now. The sound of 62 envelopes opening at once is something I will not soon forget. For about 15 seconds, there was only the rustle of paper and the soft strains of the band. Then, a man at table 4 said loudly, "What is this?" A woman near the window stood up from her chair, holding the papers in both hands, her face gone from confusion to something harder. "Gregory," she said, and her voice carried across the room, "you told my husband this investment was government-backed. We lost $60,000. Her husband stood beside her. From table 7, a man recognized as one of Gregory's colleagues said more quietly but no less clearly, "These are financial records. These are real." The band stopped playing. At the head table, Gregory's face did not collapse immediately. He was too practiced for that. He looked first at the guests, then at Claire, then finally at me. His expression was very still, and underneath the stillness there was something I can only describe as the look of a man who has just realized the ground he was standing on was not ground at all. "Dorothy," his voice was controlled but tight, "what have you done?" I stepped back, I said, exactly as you asked. I have removed myself from the cottage on Georgian Bay, which is no longer in my name, from several other assets you may have been expecting access to, and I have allowed these good people to read what my investigator found, because they deserved to know who they were celebrating tonight. Claire was very still beside him. She had the document open on the table in front of her, and she was reading. "Claire," Gregory said, turning to her, "this is her doing this. You can see what she is. This is exactly what I told you. She cannot let you go." Claire looked up from the capers. Her face was something I had never seen before. Not anger exactly, and not grief exactly, but a kind of terrible arriving understanding. "Gregory," she said quietly, "you told me she was controlling, but you did not tell me why you needed her not to trust her own instincts." Gregory pushed back from his chair. He did not make it to the door. Two men crossed the room to meet him, officers who had been in contact with Sandra for several weeks, waiting patiently and legally for this particular evening to provide a publicly documented opportunity. One showed Gregory a badge. "Mr. Malone," he said, "we have been looking forward to having a conversation with you." Claire sat at the head table for a long time after they left. I came and sat beside her. She did not speak for a while. Outside, through the tall windows, the Ontario sky had gone dark, and the stars were beginning. She stared at her hands in her lap, bare now, the ring set carefully on the tablecloth between us. "How long?" she finally asked. "Sandra started 6 months ago," I said. "I had suspicions for longer." "Why did you not tell me?" she asked. She was not accusing, she was asking genuinely. "I tried twice," I said. "You told me I was being overprotective, and you were right too. I had no proof then, only instinct. By the time I had proof, the wedding was weeks away, and I knew if I came to you with documents alone, he would spin it. He would use it to drive the wedge between us even deeper. I needed the truth to come from a place he could not control." I paused. "I also should have found a way to tell you sooner. That part is mine to sit with. I made choices about how to protect you, and some of those choices were not mine alone to make. I am sorry for that, Claire." She reached over and took my hand. Her grip was tight and a little unsteady, the way it was when she was small and frightened, and I held on. "I feel so stupid," she whispered. "You were not stupid," I said firmly. "You loved someone who spent considerable effort making sure you would trust him and doubt everyone else. That is not stupidity. That is what manipulation looks like from the inside." She leaned her head against my shoulder, and we sat there in the emptying room while the caterers moved quietly around us and the band packed up their instruments and the night came fully down outside. 2 days later, Sandra called me again. Gregory's business partner had not been at the wedding. He had already left the city, but Sandra had been tracking something for 6 weeks she had not shared with me yet. She had wanted to be certain first. He had moved his operation to Calgary. He was in a relationship with a young woman whose mother was a recently widowed professor with considerable assets. The pattern was identical, down to the timing. "Her name is Marguerite," Sandra told me. "She is 61. She does not know." I was quiet for a moment. "Can you get me her contact information?" I asked. I called Marguerite the following afternoon. She answered on the third ring in the careful, measured way of someone who doesn't recognize the number but is too polite not to pick up. I introduced myself, explained who I was, and said I had some information about a man named Paul that she might want to hear. She was silent long enough that I thought she might hang up. "I've had a feeling," she finally said, very quietly, "for a few weeks now, something I could not name." "I know that feeling," I said. She invited me to come to Calgary. I flew out on a Thursday. Marguerite met me at a small, warm cafe near the university with mismatched chairs and the smell of good coffee. She was a tall woman with close-cropped gray hair and careful eyes that I immediately respected. We sat across from each other with Sandra's documents between us, and she read everything slowly and without interruption. When she finished, she set the papers down and folded her hands. "What do we do?" she asked. "We do what I wish someone had done for me," I said. "We make sure he cannot do it again." Marguerite and I worked with Sandra and with the Calgary police over the following 2 weeks. Paul was arrested on a Thursday morning, and the connection between his operation and Gregory's unraveled quickly from there. 5 families across 3 provinces had been targeted by this same network. 4 of them had not known the others existed. They knew now. In the months that followed, Claire moved back to Oakville for a while. We fell into a rhythm that reminded me gently of when she was young, and the house was full of her drawings and her music, and the particular comfortable noise of a shared life. One evening in November, she looked up from her sketchbook and said, "Mom, the Georgian Bay cottage, did you really sell it?" "Yes," I said. "Do you regret it?" she asked. I thought about it, honestly. "The cottage I do not regret," I said. "Certain other choices, how I handled the timing, some of the things you did not know until too late, those I think about, but I would do it again, all of it." She nodded slowly. "I know," she said. "I just wanted you to know that I know." Marguerite called me the following spring. Her and her daughter had started a small peer support group in Calgary for women who had been targeted by romantic fraud, a quiet gathering that met twice a month in a community center near the university. No judgment, no press, just women in a room together, sharing what they had learned. She asked if Claire and I might want to come and speak. We drove to Calgary in June. I stood up in that community center and I told them what I told Claire the night of the wedding, and what I'm telling you now. Real love does not keep score of your freedoms. It does not arrive with a list of people you must distance yourself from. It does not smile politely across a restaurant table and tell you that your mother is the problem. Love does not ask you to choose, because love understands that the people who loved you first are not competition. They are context. If someone in your life is systematically separating you from the people who have known you longest, that is not intimacy they are building. That is isolation, and isolation is not an accident. It is a method.
The instinct you've been second-guessing, the thing you could not name, the unease you kept pushing down because you didn't want to seem paranoid or difficult or too much. Write it down, say it out loud, show it to someone you trust, because that feeling has a name and it is trying to protect you. You are allowed to take up space in your own family. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to say, something here does not add up without apologizing for it. And if the person you love responds to your honesty, not with reassurance, but with pressure, with ultimatums, with that quiet threat of making you choose, please hear me when I say, that is your answer. You do not need to wait for proof you can hold in your hands. The pattern itself is the proof. I lost a cottage on Georgian Bay. I watched my daughter walk up an aisle towards a man I knew was going to hurt her, and I made a choice to let the truth surface on its own terms. I've sat with that choice long enough to know both its costs and its reasons, but I did not lose my daughter, and in the end, that is the only inheritance that ever mattered. The morning light still comes through my kitchen window, gold and warm. The birch trees still sway. I still stand there with my coffee and think about Raymond and about all the tiles we chose together and about all the years between then and now that have not always been what I planned, but have been stubbornly and completely mine. If this story reached you where you needed it, share it with someone tonight. And if you recognize yourself anywhere in these words, I want you to know you are not alone and it is not too late. If you are new here, this channel is for the quiet ones, the mothers, the daughters, the women who have been told they are too much and have decided that is perfectly fine. Subscribe and stay because we are just getting started.